but thanks again for joining us, and I'll get started. So welcome to our webinar, High Voltage, High Rewards Transmission. Thank you for joining. Today, we're going to explore how large-scale transmission solutions deliver significant cost savings to American businesses and consumers. A quick reminder, this webinar will be recorded and posted to RMI's event page, and will be posted shortly after this event. We'll send that recording out to everyone, along with other resources, including the report itself and our contacts. My name is Tyler Farrell. I am a manager here at RMI on our carbon-free electricity program, and I'm based out of Boulder, Colorado. And today I'm going to be joined by my co-author, Celia Tandon. Celia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Celia Tandon. I'm an associate also here with RMI's carbon-free electricity team, and I'm based in Brooklyn, New York.
Great, so here's an agenda for today. This webinar will be 1 hour long and end at the top of the hour. We'll begin with a brief introduction to RMI if you're not too familiar with our organization, and then we will dive into our report. We'll start off with some background on transmission investment and planning today across the country. We'll then take a deep dive into our methodology and make those benefits really real by looking at a single case study that Celia will walk you through. After that, we'll highlight our 4 key findings and end with a quick discussion on what to take out of this report and how the US can really seize the opportunity that large-scale transmission provides. During the presentation, there will be 2 question periods, one in the middle and one at the end. The first one will be around 5 minutes long and offer the opportunity to answer any questions to clarify your understanding of our methodology and our case study. And the latter question opportunity will provide an opportunity for any broad questions. Throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom to ask any questions, or you can alternatively, you can raise your hand. And during the Q&A period, we will alternate between those questions that are in the Q&A function and people that have raised their hand. If you do raise your hand, we will be elevating you to a panelist for you to come off mute and if you want, come off video and have an engaging discussion with us. We highly encourage that and want our participants to be as much in the room as possible. The final thing to highlight during the presentation is that if you are hard of hearing, please use the show captions feature at the bottom of the Zoom, and that will Zoom will automatically take our voice and turn that into words on your screen. So RMI is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Many think of us as some sort of think tank. That's pretty much right. I think we describe it a little bit more in depth as a think, do, and scale tank. And what I mean by that is that we think of solutions, we implement them in the field, and then we scale them across the industry. The industries I'm talking about are industry broadly, carbon-free mobility and transportation, buildings, and of course, electricity. Celia and I are part of the carbon-free electricity team, which is around 70 people strong. It's primarily based in the US with some global staff around the world. Within our carbon-free electricity team, our sub-team focuses on ensuring transmission supports the energy transition. We work across the United States, but specifically we're focused on transmission planning processes in the Western US and in PJM. But like I said, we focus on grid solutions broadly and have published a number of reports and insights on regional transmission planning, grid enhancing technologies, and how large new loads are impacting our grid today. We love working with others, including public utility commissioners, energy offices, elected officials, and utilities across the country. At the end of the presentation, I'll remind you of this again, but please reach out to us if anything speaks to you during this presentation. We love chatting about our work. Moving on to the main event, high voltage, high rewards transmission. Celia and I are really excited to get this work out into the world and really thankful that you joined us today. We published this report back in February 2025, and today we're really going to dive into the key findings and what to take away from the report. But to start, I just wanted to start off with some background on what transmission investment look like across the US today. So many of you have probably heard that there's a huge need and scale for new transmission across the US. This is being driven by several factors, but four that we're going to point out today are growing electricity demand. I'm sure you've all heard of data centers recently. Resilience to extreme weather events. We need a stronger, more resilient system to deal with the crazy weather that we're experiencing today, whether that's heat waves, forest fires, cold snaps in Texas, hurricanes. A stronger grid is a more resilient grid. The third piece is compliance with new federal regulation, including the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's Order 1920, that plans to improve transmission planning at the regional level across the United States and lead to the build out of more of these large scale transmission lines that we're going to talk about today. And we'll discuss this in more depth at the end of the presentation. And finally, our decarbonization goals across the US by states, corporates, and others. On decarbonization, there's a significant need for transmission to meet a net zero America. On the far left bar, we're showing the current transmission today is 150,000 gigawatt miles. A gigawatt mile is 1 gigawatt of capacity over 1 mile of distance on a transmission line. The middle bar shows addition from major projects under development today. This is from Grid Strategy's Ready to Go report, and it's around 15% more transmission line miles. Finally, this far right bar shows the needed transmission for economy-wide decarbonization from Net Zero Princeton University's Net Zero America study across a couple of variety of different scenarios. And that ranges from around 100% more transmission by 2050 to over 400% more transmission by 2040. But of course, as the need and scale for transmission grows across all these different factors, so do concerns about ratepayers' rising electricity costs. To achieve affordability through new load growth, extreme weather events, the clean energy transition, it will be essential for regulators and planners to really ensure that ratepayers' money is being spent efficiently. In this report, we're going to cover three different types of transmission: local transmission, regional transmission, and interregional transmission. I'm going to start off with local transmission. This is the transmission that's planned and built by a single utility entirely within their footprint. I'm here in Boulder, Colorado. I get my electricity bills from Xcel Energy, and they deliver the power to my house. Here in a local transmission line by Xcel Energy might look like a line built for a local reliability need in my neighborhood, or a line built to connect new generation or load. These are the type of lines that are not distribution lines, but transmission lines that are going to be larger, but still within my neighborhood, and maybe between here in Boulder, Colorado, and Denver, Colorado. Regional transmission lines are projects planned by regional planning entities across the United States, and they'll span multiple utility footprints. So there are 11 regional transmission planning entities across the United States. That is what this map presents here. And again, an example of a regional line here in Colorado would be a line being planned by West Connect, which you can see in green on this map. And a line that might be planned by them is a line that goes from Xcel Energy's territory in Colorado down to New Mexico, to Public Service Company of New Mexico's territory. And a line like this, I might see when I'm driving down to New Mexico for a hiking or skiing trip, and we'll see it on the side of a state highway, and they're going to be quite large. They might not be the largest lines you see, but they're going to be large. Finally, interregional lines are planned by multiple regional entities across multiple regional footprints. These are the type of lines that are going to span multiple boundaries across regional entities. So, for example, in Colorado, this might span West Connect to Northern Grid or West Connect to SPP. An example for the East would be a line that goes from PJM to MISO, and these are going to typically be larger lines. You might see these as you drive across the country on an interstate highway. In this report, we're going to focus on these latter two lines, the regional and interregional line, and show that they can serve as prudent investments, as cost-effective investments that deliver long-term savings to ratepayers across the country. However, today, where a lot of our investment and planning is focused is on reliability projects at the local and sometimes regional level. Over 90% of investments in the US are driven solely by reliability need without assessing for cost savings. And this came out of a recent report from Brattle. Regional planning for economic purposes accounts for less than 10% of transmission investments, and multi-benefit regional planning across the United States is primarily an afterthought. Finally, interregional planning is almost non-existent in the US. We have very few examples of major interregional projects that have been built in the past few decades. As a result, where we're at in our transmission planning functions today is that transmission planning is not well integrated and is primarily separated into a reliability-focused planning and then economic planning. And as a result, we've seen an increase in those reliability projects up to around 90% of total investment and a decrease in those large-scale cost-effective projects. However, it doesn't need to be that way. Utilities can lower costs and improve reliability through coordinated multi-benefit regional planning across the US. And what we hope to show with this report is that large-scale transmission investments that come out of multi-benefit regional transmission planning can deliver significant savings for Americans, consumers, and businesses. And the way we did that in this report is we looked at several regional and interregional lines that cross the United States, from California to Oklahoma. This map here shows all 7 lines. And what our analysis does is it looks retrospectively at all 7 lines and assesses how did they perform? What were the cost savings to consumers? Shortly, Celia will kind of dive into the methodology about just how we did that. But first, I'm going to talk about why we selected these 7 lines. So these 7 lines were selected across 4 different categories. First, we wanted to showcase regional and interregional projects across the United States. These are the large-scale lines that we believe are cost-effective investments. Second, we wanted to cover a wide breadth of geographic scope. So we pick lines that touch each of the 7 RTO regions. Notice we did not pick any lines in non-RTO regions. The reason being is, as Celia will discuss, there lacks data in dispatch, economic dispatch, and resource adequacy, and other data required to put together this analysis. The third category is we wanted lines to provide 10 years of operational data, so we had a sufficient sample size to evaluate over. We didn't want to pick a line, for example, that was built in 2020 and had only experienced 3 extremely weird years of COVID and high natural gas prices and low natural gas prices. We wanted a broad spectrum of years. Finally, we wanted to showcase a variety of different developmental drivers, from multi-benefit lines to public policy lines, and some reliability lines, those large-scale regional reliability lines that can deliver cost savings. So as a result of our analysis that we'll discuss in more depth, our main finding from this report is that all 7 lines delivered savings to ratepayers. This benefit to cost ratio is going to come up a number of times during our presentation, and any number above 1 indicates that annual savings on average were above cost. One way to think about this benefit to cost ratio is that these 7 lines delivered anywhere between $1.10 and $3.90 in savings for every dollar of ratepayer cost. Another way to think of this ratio is that the ratio is an indication of how many times this project paid for itself. So if you think about a project that has $1 billion in lifetime ratepayer cost, so I'm not talking about construction cost, I'm talking about real ratepayer cost, a ratio of 2 would indicate that it delivered $2 billion in ratepayer savings over its lifetime. So with that, I'll pass it over to Celia to dive a little bit more into our methodology and one of our case studies.
Thank you, Tyler, for providing that background on transmission investments and introducing our report. In this section, I'm going to provide a brief overview of our methodology for quantifying ratepayer cost savings from these large-scale transmission projects. So in our report, we conservatively assess 4 ways that transmission saves money for consumers. The first way is congestion relief savings, or savings from reducing transmission congestion. Second is resource adequacy savings, which stem from providing access to cheaper sources of generation capacity. Third, public policy savings, or savings from providing access to renewable sources of generation that meet public policy goals. And then finally, on a project-by-project basis, we include other project-specific benefits. Now, these are just 4 benefits of transmission, but transmission can provide many, many more savings for its ratepayers. For instance, the new FERC Order 1920 outlines 7 transmission benefits. MISO's long-range transmission planning process outlines 6 benefits, and the Brattle Group has outlined 8. Therefore, our calculated benefits in this report are likely conservative, meaning that they underestimate the full range of benefits that transmission can deliver to its ratepayers. We consider these 4 core benefits on a project-by-project basis. So this table that you're looking at here outlines our 7 case studies and their associated benefits that we evaluated in our analysis. As you'll see, all 7 projects provided congestion relief savings. However, we only attributed resource adequacy savings to projects that are in states or markets that had resource adequacy programs or capacity markets. We only attributed public policy savings to projects that are located in regions with public policy goals and projects that enabled substantial clean energy investment. Finally, we only included other project-specific benefits for projects with well-documented additional benefits. This diagram here provides an illustration of our benefit cost analysis. You'll see that we added up all of our 4 core benefits of transmission and divided it by annual costs to produce that benefit cost ratio that Tyler introduced earlier in the presentation. The costs and benefits in this report are calculated as total rate impacts for all ratepayers, whether that's residential, commercial, or industrial, rather than a societal benefit cost analysis. This benefit cost analysis approach outlined here is similar to that conducted by transmission planners across the United States. In particular, MISO, SPP, and CAISO use similar multi-benefit planning when evaluating their regional lines. And what we found from our cost-benefit ratio is that across all 7 projects, ratepayer savings exceeded costs. And so this diagram here illustrates the benefit cost ratio for our 7 case studies broken down by benefit types. As you'll see, congestion relief savings make up the large majority of benefits to our ratepayers. However, as we'll explore in the next section where we go through a case study, benefits such as resource adequacy, public policy, and other project-specific benefits are equally tangible and do contribute to lower bills to our ratepayers. So now with this overview of our methodology, I'm going to walk us through just one case study, the Valley to Colorado River project, which is located in CAISO. Through this case study walkthrough, we'll explore the benefit cost analysis in more detail. We chose to walk through this case study because it showcases all 4 benefits. And throughout this section, I will walk through each benefit individually and supply more detail on how these benefits deliver real, tangible savings to our ratepayers. But first, a little bit of context. The Valley to Colorado River project is a 500 kilovolt project that's 153 miles long, located in Southern California. It was developed by Southern California Edison and was designed to connect load centers in Southern California to the promising solar potential in the Blythe, California area. Since it was energized in 2013, this project has generated significant savings for California ratepayers, and I will now walk through each of those benefits and how they contributed to savings. The first benefit that we analyzed in our report is congestion relief savings, and this is the most commonly considered benefit of transmission. So congestion refers to situations in which transmission bottlenecks require more expensive local generators to run while cheaper generators operate at a reduced capacity, or while wind and solar resources are curtailed. Expanding transmission capacity can help relieve this congestion by allowing cheaper power to flow from other areas, while those more local, more expensive generators remain on standby. Ratepayer congestion relief savings are reflected in wholesale market energy prices. So the map on the right here displays the energy prices of nodes in California during a typical workday morning. The blue nodes indicate lower energy prices, and the red nodes indicate higher energy prices. In the absence of transmission congestion, this whole map would be the same color. However, during this hour of congestion, there's a lack of transmission capacity to move lower cost energy in the blue areas to higher cost areas in red. In our analysis, we calculate the congestion relief savings for our ratepayers by comparing the energy prices at the nodal ends of a line. The map on the left here displays the energy prices at the ends of the Valley to Colorado transmission line during that same hour of congestion that we just looked at on the previous slide. During this hour, the price of energy was higher in the valley, so in that yellow node, than it is in the Blythe area, that blue node. Therefore, at this time, grid operators would have cheaper power flow from the Blythe area, allowing more expensive generators in the valley to be on standby. The diagram on the right illustrates how we calculated congestion relief savings during this 1 hour of congestion. We took the difference in energy prices between the valley node and the Blythe node and multiplied that by the capacity of the transmission line. And as you'll see, we found that during just this 1 hour, the project delivered $48,000 in savings to its ratepayers. And this calculation was then repeated for every hour of congestion that this project has experienced since it was energized. All right, moving on to our second benefit that we analyzed in our report, which is the resource adequacy savings. So across the United States, utilities must secure enough generation capacity to meet peak hour demand during a given year. That is, utilities must ensure that the lights can stay on for all of their paying customers. Some regions implement resource adequacy programs, which set annual capacity standards to ensure that the grid has this reliability. Of course, the cost of procuring capacity is dependent on location due to various factors, including land acquisition costs and resource availability. Transmission can help regions meet their resource adequacy standards by bringing in cheaper capacity from other regions. An example of this is shown in the map on the right. CAISO has a resource adequacy program with local capacity requirements for its highly populated zones. So in the case of the Valley to Colorado River project, this transmission project helps the Los Angeles Basin Zone meet its local capacity standards more cost effectively by enabling access to cheaper natural gas and battery capacity in the Blythe region to flow into the Los Angeles Basin. The map on the left illustrates the over 2.2 gigawatts of storage and 500 megawatts of natural gas plants that were enabled by the Valley to Colorado River transmission line. These sources of capacity are cheaper than if the line wasn't in existence, and the LA basin may have needed to produce capacity within its own footprint, perhaps at a higher cost. So the savings from these cheaper generation sources are reflected in CAISO's resource adequacy program. And the diagram on the right, again, illustrates how we calculate the project's resource adequacy savings during that year, 2022. We take the difference in the annual resource adequacy cost between the two nodes and then multiply that by the capacity of the transmission line. And as you'll see at the bottom, during just the year 2022, this project delivered $22 million in resource adequacy savings for California ratepayers. This calculation is then repeated for every year that the project has been in operation. The third benefit that we quantified in this report is public policy savings. So many states have public policy goals that require a certain percentage or amount of renewable energy procurement. Again, the cost of procuring renewable energy is heavily influenced by location due to various factors, but including quality of wind and amount of solar radiation. Transmission can help states meet their public policy goals more cost effectively by connecting cheaper energy sources from resource-rich areas to the grid. So the map on the right here displays California's solar irradiation with the darker red indicating stronger irradiation. The Blythe end of the transmission line that we're analyzing is in that solar-rich region, or that more red region in the southeast portion of the state. The transmission line can now allow cheaper new solar projects in Blythe to be connected to the grid. And if that line didn't exist, utilities would have needed to secure more expensive solar capacity from less solar-rich regions in California. The map on the left illustrates the over 3.9 gigawatts of solar plants that were enabled by the Valley to Colorado River transmission line. We quantify the public policy savings by comparing the cost of energy between just one of these individually enabled solar plants to the average cost of energy of solar resources across the RTO. So the diagram on the right illustrates this calculation for one of those enabled plants, the Blythe Solar 2 plant, which is also pointed out in the diagram or in the map on the left. To calculate this one plant's public policy savings, we take the difference in its cost of energy to the average cost of energy for a solar plant in CAISO and multiply it by the generation of the Blythe Solar 2 plant. What we found is that this single plant yielded $3.2 million in savings per year to California ratepayers. This methodology is then repeated for all 17 solar plants that were enabled by the Valley to Colorado River project. Finally, we also included other project-specific benefits in our analysis. However, unlike the three core benefits that I just outlined, these benefits are not validated ex post. Instead, they are taken as reported by transmission developers' original projections due to challenges in independent verification. However, these benefits are significant and they do provide real value to our ratepayers, so we made sure to include them in our analysis. For example, in the case of the Valley to Colorado River project, this includes $20 million in operational savings from better real-time grid management, $1 million in savings per year from reduced nitrogen oxide emissions, and $2 million per year from reduced transmission losses due to more efficient power flow across the newly upgraded network. For each case study, we also commented on additional benefits that we did not quantify in our analysis due to challenges in that quantification process. For this project, one of those benefits is enhance regional resilience to extreme heat and wildfires. So y'all may remember between 2018 and 2021, California was in a period of extreme drought and wildfire. And during this period, increased transmission connectivity, including from this project, was critical to keeping the lights on as rising temperatures drove up demand and wildfires and smoke triggered outages across California. While our analysis did not quantify this benefit, the ability to keep the lights on is immensely beneficial to ratepayers. And other studies that have quantified this benefit have found that resiliency can lead to tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars in savings. So adding up all of these benefits that I just walked us through, we find that the Valley to Colorado River project has delivered significant savings to California ratepayers. In particular, it has delivered an average of $156 million in total savings per year. When possible, in our report, we also compared the line's projected benefits in its initial planning phase to the realized benefits that we calculated using our benefit cost analysis. For this project, the developer Southern California Edison expected it to deliver numerous economic benefits to its ratepayers. And as such, during the planning process, it quantified these benefits using CAISO's transmission economic assessment methodology. The figure you're looking at here on the right shows the projected benefits from the original planning documents. You'll see that original planners anticipated a benefit cost ratio of 1.2 to 3.2 with a median ratio of 1.7. But what our analysis showed us is that the Valley to Colorado River project not only delivered significant savings to its ratepayers, but these savings also surpassed their planners' expectations. So while the project was projected to deliver $1.70 in savings per dollar invested, it actually delivered $3.30, which is nearly double the developer's initial projections. Additionally, we found that this project will recoup its full $2 billion in ratepayer lifetime costs within just 11 years of operation. And since transmission projects remain operational for decades beyond their financial life, this project will continue to deliver savings to ratepayers for many more decades to come. So with that overview of our methodology and walkthrough of one of our case studies, I will now pass it over to Tyler to lead us through our first Q&A session.
Great, thank you, Celia. I think we're going to keep this brief just for the sake of time and really focus on the Q&A, the questions that came in for the Q&A. Vlad, I would definitely encourage you to keep your hand up and we'll answer your question at during the last Q&A session. Celia, do you want to walk me through some of these questions?
Yes. So we have a question from Martin that is, can you address the potential for grid enhancing technologies such as dynamic line rating?
So none of the projects that we assessed, none of the 7 projects that we assessed were grid enhancing technologies or alternative transmission technologies, but there are many studies out there that show that these are cost-effective investments for the grid and really save ratepayers. It's not something that I'm going to touch on right now, but I'll touch on it during our final discussion at the end. Maybe we can do a couple more, Celia. I'm just seeing one about from Shivran. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. What are these avoided non-CO2 costs? Is that the cost of emission avoided by the line enabling cleaner energy resources? Yes. So that non-CO2 benefit is quantified based off of these are fossil fuel plants that are in the LA basin, and it's a health benefit that Southern California Edison calculated based off the NOx and SOx emissions in the LA basin. I'm going to move up and answer some of these other questions. There seems like there's 2 similar questions about the congestion relief savings on how what is like kind of like the underlying effect of congestion relief. And yes, it's similar. Fossil fuels are typically going to be more expensive on the margin, and that's what we see in the market. So when we see a local marginal price of $30, that's indicative that it costs $30 per megawatt hour for that plant to run. And what we see in our report and in our analysis is if it's $30 for that fossil plant to run in the Blythe Desert, it's a lot cheaper to run a solar plant or a battery plant at $8. And there is some substitution of clean energy resources and fossil fuel resources, although it doesn't always need to be that way. There are fossil fuel resources that might be replacing each other depending on the node and what region we're looking at. Want to make sure I'm addressing all of these kind of methodology questions. This first question from Elisa on the savings, like what is the time frame we're looking at? We looked at two different time frames. So we look at the life to date, which Celia showed on the previous slide, and that is the time between when. Sorry, yeah, that's the life to date here, which is from the time it's operational to the end of 2023. And then we also look at the lifetime. So from the energization date to 40 years, the financial lifetime, 40 years after that energization date. I'm going to move us along, though. Please keep adding your questions, and please please feel free to put up your hand. Vlad, I saw your hand go down, but please feel free to put it up at the end of the presentation, and we'll get to it then. Celia, you can take us through our key findings now.
Thank you all for the questions and look forward to having a second Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So in this section now, I will provide an overview of the report's key findings, all of which reinforce that large-scale transmission projects deliver significant savings to American consumers and businesses. As a reminder, we analyzed 7 regional and interregional projects operating across the country. And these projects not only showcase geographical diversity, but also a variety of development drivers. So our first key finding is that for every single case study, ratepayer savings exceeded costs. And so this diagram that you're looking at here, you've seen before, but just to repeat, it's the benefit cost ratio for our 7 case studies broken down by benefit type. As I mentioned before, these benefit cost ratios range from 1.1 to 3.9, and any ratio above 1.0 indicates that on average, annual savings exceeded annual costs. One way to interpret this benefit to cost ratio is that savings range from $1.10 to $3.90 for every dollar spent. Again, congestion relief savings made up the large majority of the benefits to ratepayers, but as we just covered in the Valley to Colorado River project, benefits such as resource adequacy, public policy savings, and other project-specific benefits were equally tangible and also provided savings to ratepayers. Now, transmission projects are typically designed to meet a specific need. We picked these 7 case studies to showcase a variety of development drivers, and we categorize these development drivers as projects that aimed to deliver multiple economic benefits, projects that were primarily public policy driven, and projects that were primarily reliability driven. While transmission projects are typically designed to meet one of these specific needs, our analysis found that their realized benefits extend well beyond their initial purpose. We can further categorize these development drivers into 2 buckets. So unlike reliability-driven projects, multi-benefit and public policy projects are designed with economic benefits in mind during the planning process. So therefore, we can categorize our case studies by non-reliability versus reliability projects, or projects that do and do not consider economic benefits during planning. The next two key findings in our report will speak to these two buckets separately. So first, talking about the non-reliability project. Our second key finding is that the 5 projects aimed at delivering economic benefits exceeded planners' expectations. So these multi-benefit and public policy projects enabled access to low-cost generation. They improved resiliency to extreme weather events, and they also enabled states to meet their public policy goals. While all of these projects were built with economic benefits in mind, only 3 out of the 5 had benefit to cost projections in their original project plans. And these initial projections are shown as the white dashed lines on this diagram here. You'll see that the 3 projects with pre-existing benefit cost analyses outperformed their cost benefit projections. Furthermore, regionally planned non-reliability projects are expected to surpass the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's 1.25 benefit to cost standard. And as you'll see in this diagram, each of the 5 non-reliability projects significantly surpass that threshold. So now we're moving to our third finding, which focuses on reliability project. And our third finding is that the 2 reliability-driven projects delivered unintended economic benefits. These reliability projects were deemed necessary to ensure grid safety and function, and as such, economic benefits were not factored into their original project plans. Similarly, these projects are not required to meet FERC's 1.25 benefit to cost standard. However, our analysis shows that in addition to meeting their reliability objectives, these projects also generated significant economic benefits, approaching or exceeding that FERC 1.25 threshold, as shown in this figure to the right. In both cases, these projects paid for themselves with just their unintended economic benefits. Our fourth and final key finding from our report is that transmission is a long-term investment that delivers enduring savings to ratepayers over time. Our analysis found that all 7 projects paid for themselves, with payback periods occurring between 8 and 34 years. Additionally, their benefit cost ratios grow with time due to 2 main drivers, which are illustrated in the diagram on the right, showing the Valley to Colorado River project's annual benefits and costs. The first driver is that transmission projects are very large capital investments, with most of their costs depreciating over time. Secondly, transmission benefits typically remain stable over time. And finally, because transmission projects often remain operational beyond their financial lifespan, we expect these projects to continue delivering cost savings to ratepayers for many more decades to come. And this is well illustrated in the Pacific Intertie project, although this is not one of the 7 projects that we analyzed in our report. The Pacific direct current and alternating current interties connect Oregon to Southern California, as shown in the map on the right. While these lines have been in operation for over 54 years, they've already paid for their original $700 million price tag many, many times over. So with that overview of our key findings, I will pass it over to Tyler to conclude with a final discussion.
Great. Thank you, Celia, for walking us through our key findings and takeaways from this report. I'm now going to talk about what opportunity we have to seize the large-scale transmission investment opportunity and improve regional transmission or improve transmission planning across the United States. So like I started with at the beginning of this presentation, our transmission planning is primarily focused on these reliability projects, these local and regional reliability projects. In order to seize the large-scale transmission opportunity, we need to change our transmission planning paradigm. And there are 2 ways we're going to focus on that today. The first one is we should better integrate local and regional planning. And the second way is we should improve regional transmission planning practices as they are today. So the first one is focused on we should better integrate local and regional planning. And luckily, my colleagues Claire, Kaya, and Chaz recently wrote an amazing report, Mind the Regulatory Gap, which focuses on local transmission planning and some of the gaps in oversights and planning. Their solution, or one of their solutions rather, is region-first planning. It's a relatively simple change in how we do transmission planning. First, utilities would submit their local needs instead of submitting their local solutions to the regional transmission planning entity. The regional transmission planning entity would then identify the region need as a whole alongside those local needs from utilities at the local level. The third step would be that the planning entities then identify the best solutions over both the local and regional needs, really identifying those cost-effective regional solutions and those large-scale transmission projects that we've identified in this report. Finally, once the regional planning entity identifies the cost-optimized, cost-effective portfolio of regional transmission projects, transmission owners can then optionally submit any additional local projects if they feel like their local needs have not been met. This really changes the paradigm that we plan transmission in the US from a bottoms-up local process to a top-down regional process, and better integrates our local and regional and reliability and cost-effective planning. So moving on, another suggestion that we have for transmission planning across the United States is to better improve regional transmission planning practices. And luckily, we have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's Order 1920 that creates a clear pathway for this multi-benefit comprehensive regional planning across the US. Order 1920 requires a number of things, but 4 key things to improve regional planning. First is it requires a list of 7 quantified benefits. As you saw on in our report, and as we discussed, most of the time benefits are never even quantified. It's just reliability. The second requirement is to require at least 3 plausible and diverse scenarios to test our transmission system amongst a number of different events that could impact the system, whether that's increased load growth, extreme weather events, etc. The third piece is the requirement of alternative transmission technologies, including grid-enhancing technologies. Like I said in the Q&A period, these are going to be cost-effective investments and have been proven over and over again to be so. Finally, a requirement of right-sizing transmission options. And this is similar to our second suggestion to better integrate local and regional transmission options. And it looks at those local solutions and says, should this be a regional solution of higher voltage, a larger scale, and requires that consideration. The goal of Order 1920 is to really revolutionize that regional planning that gets done by these regional planning entities, all 11 across the United States. And luckily, we have an example of Order 1920 principles already in action today, delivering cost-effective, large-scale solutions to ratepayers. In the Midwest, we have the Mid-Continental Independent System Operator, and they've been doing long-range transmission planning since 2019. And they evaluate 6 benefits under a couple different scenarios and really do regional planning well. In fact, they've recently approved 2 cost-effective transmission portfolios that are going to be delivering savings to ratepayers for decades to come. Tranche 1 was approved in 2022 and identified a benefit to cost ratio between 2.6 and 3.8, while Tranche 2.1 was approved in 2024 and identified a benefit to cost ratio between 1.8 and 3.5. So this concludes the presentation portion of our webinar. Thank you for coming. We will have a question Q&A period after this. What we hope you got out of this report is that there are ways to improve regional transmission planning in the United States and deliver cost savings to American consumers by prioritizing large-scale regional and interregional lines. Our four key findings from this report, as Celia mentioned, were one, that ratepayer savings exceeded costs across all 7 projects. Two, that projects aimed at delivering economic benefits exceeded expectations every single time. Three, that reliability-driven projects that needed to get built for reliability and grid safety delivered unintended economic benefits that were not foreseen. And then finally, that transmission is a long-term investment. We looked at a 40-year financial lifespan for all of our projects, but many of these projects are likely going to be operational for decades to come and deliver enduring cost savings to ratepayers. So with that, thank you for participating, and we can jump into our final Q&A session, and we'll go through some of these questions, but we do have around close to 10 minutes, so I would encourage people to raise their hands if they have a question as well. And Celia, I think I'm just going to walk through these from the start, if that makes sense. I think there are 2 questions from Eric and Kate Kaufman about how these savings get delivered from the RTO level, the LMP level, to consumers' utility bills. Congestion relief is a really good example of this. The within a utilities rate case, there's always going to be a purchase power and power operational kind of line item on customer bills. In an RTO, this portion of their bill is from contracts and also market purchases from the economically dispatched system. So those LMPs do get directly assigned to customer bills. And the difference in LMP, the ability to source lower cost energy elsewhere, really does lower that portion of consumers' bills. I'm going to move on to the next question. From David about ratepayers' ownerships over these projects. I'm assuming this question is focused on kind of public power and alternative financing options. So in this project, we did look at 2 projects one project rather, that was 2 lines that were financed through public power instead of investor-owned utilities, and we did find that transmission costs over the lifetime of the project were lower. This is primarily because of the lack of a return on equity, as these public power utilities are nonprofits. Noah, this is a great question about how we considered congestion savings and how we assume the maximum use of the line, and whether or not we use a ProMod type simulation. In our report, we talk about how we assume transmission capacity in all of our calculations. We did not use a ProMod type simulator or approach. But we feel like our assumptions on transmission capacity are relatively conservative. We calculated them based off their voltage and mileage and assumed that they were uncompensated AC lines. You are right that the transmission system is a network and it's complicated. We believe that our assumptions were conservative, and in fact, that when you add a transmission line, it typically had downstream and upstream effects on the system that are generally positive. Martin, I think this is a great question about what does it tell us that some of these projects even didn't even consider a benefit to cost ratio during planning. I think it's very indicative of our transmission planning paradigm in the US, like I discussed at the top of this presentation, that there's an extreme focus on reliability and lack of focus on cost effectiveness in our transmission planning. And the fact that even economic projects that were proposed did not have a benefit to cost ratio, it was more of a qualitative exercise. is indicative of the lack of cost-effective economic planning that we do not have in the US, or we do have, but is rather an afterthought in the US. So I'm seeing this next question from Kay Kaufman on, in your region first modeling for planning, how do you approach the tension between regional and state priorities? Um, so I'm assuming that this question is really focused on cost allocation, which is not something that we got to in this presentation, but is obviously a really, oh, and I don't know if Kay Kaufman, I saw that you raised your hand. If you want, we can bring you off. I'm going to bring you off mute and allow you to talk if I'm not, if that's okay for you with you. You should get a notification, Kay Kaufman, that I'm promoting you to panelist. Okay, it looks like it's coming in. Thanks for joining us, and feel free to come off mute now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Cost allocation is good, but I also was thinking about in terms of just, the kind of level of NIMBYism that you often see at the state level where people just don't want a transmission line. Cost allocation is one part of it, but local opposition can also be very fierce.
Yeah, definitely. That again, that's not something that we directly addressed in this paper, but it's obviously a critical piece of the puzzle to solve for regional transmission planning across the country. I think what we've seen in some initial research on siting and permitting is that they want people on the ground and locals and states want to know whether all options have been assessed, right? Whether grid enhancing technologies, alternative transmission technologies have been assessed. And the second piece that I think we found in our siting and permitting research is that um, they want to know like why, like the why on why we need to build these lines. Hence why we feel like region first planning, where alternative transmission technologies are assessed, grid enhancing technologies are assessed, and a full kind of broad look at the need for that transmission line is assessed with benefits and cost, is really helpful for this conversation around local opposition to lines and state opposition to line. I hope that answers your question. It's definitely a complicated problem to solve, but is one that are my hopes to continue working on.
Okay, thank you.
We are approaching the end, and I know we didn't address every single question that everyone had, but I hope we provided a good overview of the questions and answered some of your questions on the methodology. Celia, can I ask you just to pull up that final slide again? Great. So just to close this off, thank you again for participating and engaging in this discussion. We really appreciate your questions and we really appreciate you showing up. It's great to get this work out into the world. We have recorded this session and it will be posted on the event page within the next few days, along with links where you can download the slide deck and the full report. This QR code will take you straight to that webinar page where you can find those resources and our contacts. Our contacts are on this page. Please feel free to reach out to us. We love chatting about transmission and the energy world. And if you have any follow-up questions, that's also an appropriate means to ask them. Thank you again for joining, and we really hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.